So today I'm going to talk to you about the imperative of food security and competitiveness in the South African agriculture and agribusiness sector. These are critical elements to ensure that our country is food secure, that everybody has sufficient food. I'm also going to talk to you about the confidence in South Africa's agriculture and agribusiness environment and the growth, and then as well look at the policy and the legislation environment, and fourthly we'll wrap up the discussion. So the first issue on food security is we work very closely on the Economist's Global Food Security Index. They bring it out every year. South Africa obviously features in that. Currently we feature number 48 in the world. We've dropped a position or two the last year or two. In Africa we are still number one in terms of food security, but we do have one major problem, and that is that our household food security is not good. We have roughly 20% of our households in South Africa that don't have the means to afford our food in South Africa, and that's why we have the grant system to ensure that they do have sufficient income to at least buy the basics in terms of food. If we look at the competitiveness, or let me first say that in terms of food security, there are four major components. The first one is food availability. That's the production and the research and everything that goes into food availability. That's the farmer's side of it primarily. Then there's the affordability of food. What does food cost the consumer? And this is probably the most important one, because people in the country must have economic and physical access to food. The third major component is food safety and food quality and the nutritional aspect of food. And those are also important if you look at the listeriosis example that we had around food safety. So these are the three key issues, and then together with the time elements. You must sustain us over time. So South Africa is pretty good at that. It has national food security. We are a net exporter of food. And that only comes because we have a competitive agri-system in South Africa. Most of our value chains we're net exporters of. That means we're competitive on the global market. So if we look at competitiveness and we look at the principle of competitiveness, it's probably the best described in the World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Index that comes out annually. And the 2019 issue came out late in 2019. And South Africa actually improved its competitiveness from 67th to 60th position. And this is the turnaround that we're already seeing in South Africa in terms of the new administration of President Ramaphosa, etc. Obviously, the coronavirus has in the meantime hit us, and what that impact will be, we'll still have to see. Obviously, many countries are hit badly by this virus, and how it will impact on competitiveness. But the principle of competitiveness is very important. So if we look at, there are different ways to measure the competitiveness of your different value chains. The work was originally pioneered in South Africa by Professor Johan van Rooyen and Dirk Estreisen, who worked for Agbiz at that stage. Did fantastic work to look at what the efficiencies are in your different value chains. And there are different models that you can use, the relative trade advantage, Porter's diamond model, etc. Now, in this graph, you can clearly see our competitiveness in agriculture was sliding from 2000 to 2007. Working with government since then, we've improved that considerably and moving our competitiveness, increasing our competitiveness both on the primary sector and the secondary sector in South Africa. Probably the best example is the beef industry. We've been net importers of beef up until 2014. Importing roughly 5, 6, 7, 8% of our beef needs. But there's been this investment in beef in South Africa, and by being competitive in the whole value chain, since 2014 we've been a net exporter of beef, exporting to a range of countries in the Far East, the Middle East, into Africa, and generating income of over 3.5 billion in beef exports to these countries. Yes, we only export around 3-4% of our beef, but at least we've already got a foothold into these countries. And even with the last outbreak of foot and mouth disease, we managed to maintain those markets. So this is very good for the beef industry, because it lifts the whole industry and it creates more opportunities for everybody in the value chain, including your emerging farmers in that value chain. So we must grow our markets also globally. The beef is a very good example, also because it's such a big industry. And if we look at it, 42% of the beef herd in South Africa is in black hands. Only 5% is commercialized. So we must bring more black farmers, beef farmers into these value chains. Then I want to talk on the sector performance. We'll see that generally our agriculture over the last 20 years, that's primary agriculture, has grown at roughly 1.7% per annum. It's very cyclical, it's very up and down, varies from year to year because of the weather conditions. But we've seen, especially the last 2 years, that our GDP in agriculture has shrunk. We've been in a recession in agriculture, mainly because of the droughts of the past 2 years, and then also the 2015-2016 drought. So South Africa's agriculture has taken a knock over the last 3 or 4 years. Fortunately, good rains in the Western Cape over the past year, and then especially now also in the summer harvest areas have been very good. So we're looking at probably our second biggest maize crop ever in South Africa, good sunflower, good soybean yields as well. So the grain industry has been fairly flat if you look at the broader context in terms of growth, while your horticulture and your animal product industries have grown very well generally. If we look at the agribusiness confidence index, we can also show you that graph. The confidence has been very negative for the past 6, 7, 8 quarters, and that is also reflected in the low GDP figures in agriculture. It did tick up in the first quarter, but this is before the coronavirus hit us. Obviously, sentiment will be down as economic activity has also declined quite drastically over the last 2 or 3 weeks. So we need stimulus in agriculture. We need better seasons to get agriculture going again. It's been tough in agriculture the last few seasons. We must admit that. We can also see from the graphs that's what we call gross capital fixed formation has followed the negative sentiment. So while we're not in a disinvestment phase in agriculture, investment has been slower because the returns have not been very good in agriculture. Obviously, if you look at the GDP figures, that's very understandable. And a lot of farmers and enterprises have come under quite a lot of pressure in the process. So there is still investment in agriculture. It's a bit slower, but we believe as prospects pick up, we will get more investment into agriculture. The fortunate thing too with the whole lockdown and the coronavirus issue that we have is that food is an essential item, agriculture is an essential service, and so activities can actually go on. If we look at the predictions from the economists, agriculture is probably going to be of the least affected of all sectors of the economy, and for that we're thankful. We're thankful to be in such a wonderful occupation as agriculture. The one thing that's really positive about agriculture is the way that we've grown our positive trade balance. Up until 2007, when we went into a negative trade balance in agriculture, since then we've turned it around, and the graph clearly indicates an upward trend in terms of a positive trade balance. So the last 2 years we've exported in excess of $10 billion worth of agricultural products. That's roughly 60% secondary and 40% primary agriculture. That equates to well over 150 billion rands worth of exports, while we import roughly 80 billion rands worth of agricultural products like rice, wheat, etc., palm oil, etc. So, but this is very positive that our horticulture and even our animal products, we're exporting more and more. It's fantastic for our balance of payments. Agriculture is now seen as one of the 2 major growth areas for the South African economy, and now with the coronavirus, definitely as the number 1 sector in the economy. So that's good. We hope that the government also supports the sector equally as they prioritize it as a top priority in the economy. sometimes we look and want to know, where do we export to? And so the destinations are primarily into Africa still. Approximately 50% of our exports go into Africa, mostly into the SADC area around us, into places like Zimbabwe and the countries, the smaller countries like Lesotho and Swaziland and Namibia, etc. Also into Mozambique and Zambia. But then also our fastest growing area is into the East, Asia, both the Middle East and the Far East, into China specifically, while the European Union remains a very important destination as well. And actually, with the impact of the EPA agreement coming in now, that has actually grown quite a bit over the last year or two. So we're quite excited that we are managing to get diverse destinations for our products, so that we don't just rely on either Africa or Europe or Asia. So we must diversify our destinations in trade. And by doing that, we're also creating opportunity for new entrants into the agricultural space, into a high-value agricultural space. So that whole idea is to grow the market space so that we can accommodate new entrants, new investment into agriculture. If we look at, and we've had many discussions with National Treasury on this, there are two pull factors in agriculture. The first one is the exports that I've spoken of. The other one is also the processing part. And if you look at South Africa's manufacturing sector, agro-processing now constitutes 25% of total manufacturing output. That is a colossal figure. And it has been growing. It's the one sector in manufacturing that has still shown very good growth. So those pools of both the exports and the manufacturing, the agro-processing, are critical to pull production. If we don't have those, farmers won't be able to produce because they won't have markets for their product. Very interesting graph from BFAP. If they look at all the value chains and they look at the growth of the value chains over the last 5 years, specifically the value added growth as they call it, and 95% of the value chains, and they looked at probably over 35 value chains, have grown over the last 5 years. Some more, some less, but there's growth in all the value chains. So this is a very, very important aspect for us, that generally there is still growth and there is still opportunity in all the value chains. And we can even look at the major value chains. They're also showing growth in the process. Another good example is that I want to highlight is one like cotton. Cotton, there was a massive decline over many years. Over the past 3-4 years, the cotton industry has grown by 60% per annum because they brought in traceability, they brought in new technology and new markets that they opened up. So it just shows you that if you get the value chain to work right to the market, you can turn an industry around, make it competitive, and then access those markets. Right. In agriculture, we also have to talk about the policy space, the legislation space, because that creates the environment in which these value chains must operate competitively. So we look at a number of aspects in the policy and legislation space. From agri side, this is exactly where we work. We work as closely as possible with government to try and create an enabling environment in which farmers, in which agribusinesses, everybody in the value chain can invest and make profit in this process, because we must make profit in this process. We must be market driven in this process. So what are the major issues that we're looking at when we speak to government? Firstly, it's inclusive growth and job creation. So they want growth, they want it to be inclusive. We agree with that. We cannot just keep growth to a small portion of the population of South Africa. We have to take the whole population with us as far as possible. So it must be inclusive growth, and we must create the right opportunity to create jobs as well in the process. Obviously, with the crisis we have now, it's a setback, and it will take time to recover. But government is bringing in the right stimulus packages, we believe, to make sure that we have a solid basis to recover in the process. We are already writing recovery plans for government in the agriculture and the agribusiness sectors. The next one is land reform. We still have the sword of expropriation without compensation hanging over our heads. We will deal with this as soon as we can in Parliament with the amendments. We know that it's a very sensitive subject, but we also have to deal with the land issue, but we have to deal with it in a way that does not harm the sector and that encourages investment in the sector, not disinvestment. The water issue is also very important in South Africa. It's going to become more important as the demand for water from other industries, from human settlements, also becomes an issue. We have to look at climate change, which is already impacting on agriculture. We're busy with the climate change bill in NEDLAC at the moment. We have to look at infrastructure constraints that we have to deal with and get the right investments in the right place to make sure that we can, for example, export. What's been very good to see is the infrastructure development in both Cape Town and in Port Elizabeth, Kuga, and even in Durban now, bringing in new cranes so that we can load faster and get our export fruits, etc., out of the country. So that type of investment in infrastructure is very important also for the agricultural sector. And then obviously our trade agreements with our trading partners. As I mentioned, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, we believe, creates a lot of opportunity. The EPA agreement to Europe, our engagement with China on opening up those markets are very important, and with other countries as well, and the AGOA agreement that or the AGOA Act, under which we have tariff-free access into the United States. We're trying to maintain that as well. Then we also, obviously, when we wrap up, we have to look at what are the challenges that we have in agriculture. Generally, we have a robust and a resilient sector in South Africa, despite the headwinds that we've mentioned. There are many challenges in agriculture, and I can name them. Anything from the investment environment, logistics, water availability and quality, environmental sustainability, research and development, labor relations and legislation, land reform, climate change, and sometimes they seem a bit daunting. But we all have to tackle these, and we're working with government to get the best possible solution, both for the sector, but obviously for the people of South Africa. But there are so many opportunities too. We are accessing better markets. Our access to various destinations has been growing. Yes, it will be a setback with the corona pandemic, but we will reopen those markets in time. I have no doubt about that. Also, our access into Africa, I think, is going to become very important in future. So we need to look at that. So there are opportunities also that we must look at. The agriculture and agribusiness sectors are major contributors to the food security of this country. If ever this coronavirus has one positive aspect, is that government realizes now how important the agro-food system is in South Africa. It's been really good to see them engaging with us and making sure, or trying to make sure, that people have food. I think they've also seen how sensitive the food system is. The informal market system, which is nearly 40% of the total food system in South Africa, which was nearly cut off. So looking at with new eyes of small business development in the informal market system of agriculture. So there's quite a lot of positives also coming out that we think bodes well for the agricultural system going forward and being more inclusive in future. So yes, there are many risks that we have to deal with. We're trying to manage those risks as best possible. As entrepreneur, you must also understand those risks, manage those risks as you go on. Because if you understand those risks, you will know how to manage them and to ensure that you have a sustainable and a profitable enterprise in the end. Thank you.